Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Anuj toko Enewa, ko Himalayas toko Maunga, ko Ganges toko Awa, ko Bhargava toko Iwi, ko physiology toko Whanau. Kia ora. This is, I think my session is about happy students are happy learners, and I strongly believe in that, and this is from the experience that I would like to sort of share with you. So thank you to Nabil and the business school for inviting me to present how I made, I suppose I would say how I made my students who were completely disengaged, though very motivated but quite disengaged, and into learning something that's sort of quite conceptual. So I am a professional teaching fellow in the Department of Physiology at School of Medical Sciences in the Faculty of Medical Health Sciences. So the session purpose is essentially to go through our decision making, how we got disengaged students to sort of think about what they're learning and making learning objectives up front. And this was to support deeper learning as well as sort of aligning our learning assessments. So in this session, I will sort of briefly go through the problem. There was a problem, so identifying and acknowledging the problem, dissecting the problem that was existing, considering our options, what could we do in this space, how do we get those students to sort of see what we're wanting to teach. And while we're sort of thinking about that, about constructive alignment, are we teaching what we want to teach? Are we assessing what we want to assess? And while we're sort of thinking about it, to think about design thinking, how could we get students involved, have some ideas from the group of students, and then perhaps have a prototype and test on those students. And we evaluated some of it. This is just an informal evaluation that I will show today. And then what would be our next step in terms of this learning environment. So this was the main aim of our team, was to just make sure that we have an engaged student who are learning in an optimal learning environment. So before we sort of go into it, sort of a background of where, what I teach. So this is MBCHB program, which is, I believe, is the key flagship program in the Faculty of Medical Health Sciences. Students are very motivated and usually quite driven students. So this is the course, the module that I coordinate is MBCHB 221, which had a reinvigoration about 4 years ago. We went on from sort of year-long courses to just small modules. A student has to do 5 modules, and in those modules there are lectures and clinical sessions and practical labs, and which involves anatomy and physiology. There's an integrated approach, so we have a progress test at the start, middle of the year, and then at the end of the year, and then we have exit tests. The students have to do 7 of these physiology teaching labs, which is, as over here, which is neuromuscular module, respiratory module, and cardiovascular module. They also have clinical sessions that are small group teaching. So as you can see, there's a lot to be done in a short period of time. There's lots, and each module has got its own clinical sessions, and it's quite a lot, and it just made us think, are our assessment reflective of learning outcomes? So the issues, the problem, it was more jargon. It was the students, as one of the students sort of pointed out, it was full of jargon. There was lots of information. What is it for me? Am I learning what I want to learn? Is it engaging? Is it clinically relevant? I go to my clinical lectures and they talk about asthma, but what I'm doing over here is breathing into a machine, and it does not make sense to me. What's the clinical relevance? There is no clinical coherence. Students saw lectures to be an absolute completely different sort of activities to actually coming to the labs where they're going to be really sort of testing out those sort of concepts that they've done in the lectures. So they saw these as 2 separate activities, complete dissociation. There's 3 hours in a timetable of MBCHB students, which is 3 hours is a long time to integrate, to conceptualize, to think, to go from sort of superficial learning to a lot more deeper learning. And I think this was the last straw, which a student came out of the lab and said, I'm so glad this is my last physiology lab. And it just made us realize that there's something that we are not doing right. So what did we do? What could we have done? And sort of kind of thinking about learning and how do we make them happy? Should we give them extra marks for attending, or should we just actually look at what we are doing? So this is a design thinking. We we were doing it, but are we really doing it is the main sort of thing we asked. So did we empathize with the student? We were getting there. We wanted to define the problem. We wanted to ideate, or sort of think about what possible solutions we could think of. Then come up with a prototype and then test it out with the students. While doing that, we also wanted to have a constructive alignment in our course. So we wanted the assessment to be multidimensional. We wanted assessment to be integrated, which was key. We wanted assessment to have an outcome, which is the worksheets or assessment test and things, but also the experience of learning was key as well. And we wanted it to be an ongoing process rather than episodic, which is, you come to the lab, you do this, this is just done, and we move on to the next thing. So all these considerations, we actually went back to the students and said, before we did that, some of our plans were, are we teaching what we want to teach? Are the students focused on important elements? Are they getting sort of distracted by little minutiae and jargon that is absolutely not relevant? Am I aligning my learning objectives with learning activities to get assessment of learning? So those were sort of key things that we really wanted to ask. And as a teacher, you sort of think that you are doing it. Perhaps asking that question was quite a awakening for us. So we thought of things. We thought of lab quizzes. Why don't we do lab quizzes before they come to the session? Independent learning. Are we demonstrating independent learning? Should we shorten the time of the lab? Should we make it sort of really rather than 3 hours? Should we make it hour and a half and we get the work done? Can we change the assessment? Could we change it from really detailed, which gives us a lot more sort of room for demonstration of deeper learning, to more sort of simpler worksheets? Could we have, we want them to be independent, self-directed students, but are we giving them opportunities to do that? And all of our labs, without going into more jargon, we use something called as data acquisition system called Power Lab. Which is where they use and they hook up and they get some sort of signals, and those signals are biological signals such as ECG and so on. We use that, and one of the things that came up was, why don't we use a web-based platform, cloud-based platform called Kura Cloud? So before we started jumping up and down saying we found the magical solution, we thought, well, let's go and ask the students. So we got students, a group of students, and power of pizza is just amazing. You just have 3 pizzas and they all come over, and in fact they wanted to come over to give and to be participant, and they wanted to engage, they wanted to be part of that, the solution. So we asked a group of students and said, what did you do? What were your experiences? What could you have done differently? One of the things that they said was, and I didn't even think about it, is they wanted integration from in the lectures to a follow-up session, which was a clinical session, so that they take the information that they've done in the lectures to do in the lab, a practical component, and then go on to do a clinical scenario where it's application. And so they wanted a logical learning progression. We still wanted to do live practical labs, but then again wanted to clarify, why am I doing this? How is it clinically relevant? What do I do after that? And one of the key things that the students also pointed out to us, they wanted a seamless integration. They didn't want to go from one website to the next, to the next, and to the next. They wanted everything in one sort of one platform. So we implemented Kura Cloud. Pre-labs were quizzes were, we developed those quizzes, and before we actually made it live to the students, we had a group of students, biomedical students, who are not in a clinical program, and they do the traditional labs, we asked them, what do you think about this? And one of the key things that they said, oh, haven't they got it easy? And then from the feedback that we obtained from that, we implemented with the MBCHB group of students that were year 3 who had a previous exposure with the dysfunctional lab, as one of the students said. And the feedback was, again, really, really rich, which helped us to further sort of develop our Cura platform. And then on 14th of June 2017, we rolled it out. This is how it looks. It was so easy. I thought I was an HTML whiz kid. I was adding and dragging and dropping and doing all sorts of interesting things. It also made us sort of think about that what is on paper is very different to when you look at online. So we were thinking differently, such as in the case over here, it was easy editing. We moved from sort of quick check, pre-lab worksheets to a bit more information where students could drag and drop. And trust me, if I could do it, anyone else can do it. To having videos and on those videos having sort of questions. So the students, when they come to the session, they actually have seen the video, have asked the question and answered the question and are well prepared, because if they come to the lab without doing the pre-lab, the lab is locked for them. So it was also that social isolation. If they're in a group and they haven't done the pre-lab, that was a sort of a good sort of motivation for doing the pre-labs. It also gave us sort of creative license. We could do not only the labs, we could do small case studies. We could have integrated learning assessments and problem-based learning. And this is what it looks like in each lab, which, as the student said, that each lab had a pre-lab, a lab, and a post-lab discussion, which they can do at any time, anywhere they wanted to. Right, the feedback, we had 268 MBCHB students, and we had about 41%, again, without a promise of an iPad or an iPod or anything like that. They were just voluntary. 41% of the students, about 111 students, just on a Qualtrics questionnaire, gave us some feedback, of which 79% of the 111, which is 88 students, actually gave us some really rich feedback. The survey probed the sort of the questions were around finding information, lab elements, online lab elements, how well it was pitched, and also how useful was the feedback, you know, self-check and that sort of ideas. So we just wanted to sort of validate if it was stimulating, was it valuable to the students, and we also, the open text had 3 thematic clusters. How the content was organized, was it the ability to access and revise information, have integration of content, and I think cluster 2 was really important for myself, was are we getting deeper into the learning? Are we asking those questions that are really we wanted them to ask? And then also individualized feedback, learning and flexibility in learning, and was it equitable? Can students do it? If they can't make it to the lab, can they do the pre-labs prior, or can they have a look at the lab in a different space? And then there were lots of positive feedback. Some of the comments that they had was, could the lectures be aligned a bit differently over time, so that, you know, when they do the session, and that something was more logistical rather than actually, you know, with the program. And one of the things, 5% of them commented on the tutor support that was still essential. So just good to know that we are not being replaced by computers. This is the feedback from a student, that they all said it was the traditional model. It's quite different, it's quite engaging, they enjoyed. And the second feedback was, I've just taken sort of some snapshot of it, is it consolidated their learning. It was a fantastic learning environment. And we also asked the teachers, what would it be like to learn and teach in that environment? And I think one of the key things is they were no longer sort of fighting and trying to sort out logistical computer issues. They were more asking them deeper questions. The students were a lot more motivated. The students were better prepared. and they engaged a lot more in that space. So in summary, I think it was a key driver for us was to have happy students, and I think we got there. One of the things that came up, at least for myself, is that the expertise of teacher is paramount, even in that blended learning space. Use of tool and approach is very important. Although Canvas offers us learning affordances, particularly within the clinical and professional programs, we do need to employ other sort of broad range of tools. And this is how I got from absolutely disengaged students on that end to very happy, not the gentleman who's fast asleep, engaged students and sort of taking control of their own learning. Thank you very much. At this point, you ask me questions. Yes, sir.
Just when you said if they have done the pre-lab work, they're locked now.
Yes.
Does it all just they go around, right, you get out?
Yeah, so what happens is they do the pre-lab, and when they attend the lab, they have to do a group login. And in that group login, there'll be about 4 people will be logging into a computer, and once they log in, if one of the students in that group hasn't done the pre-lab, that group can't proceed. So that student is the barrier for that student to go forward, yes. Yes.
So when the student's answering the question in the video format that
Yeah.
we're using, if they get the questions wrong at that point, do they get feedback?
They get a feedback, so they check my answer or check my understanding. It gives them feedback, and then it carries on.
Do you have a branching scenario?
At this stage, no. We have something called as a commit rather than adaptive learning. We are just doing a linear learning, yes. Yes.
2 questions. First one, were you able to identify a change in the results for the students?
I mean, these are really high achiever students in the MBCHB program. There was certainly a big shift from actually asking within in the practical lab space. The students were a lot more engaged, a lot more interested in what they're learning, and I haven't actually looked at the feedback, which is what we are doing at the moment. We are looking at the correlating our experiences with the assessment that they are doing. But I can, just sort of from a personal point of view, they were a lot more engaged.
Okay, thank you. And the second question was, just to clarify, on one of your slides you said you had 5 modules every 4 to 5 weeks.
Yes.
Is that over the whole year?
Over the whole year, yes.
What's the role of cloud?
So the cloud, everything gets backed into a cloud, so that the students, when they go and do the pre-lab, it gets recorded onto the cloud. When they come to the lab, they do the lab, and that gets put on the cloud, which means if a student wants to go back and have a look at what they've done in the lab and what they've done in the tutorial or in the pre-lab, they can go back and do that. Although they've done the work as a group, they can individually log into the system. And then it gets archived, and the students can go back and retrieve that information anytime they want to over the course of 5 years. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you were wondering whether the students were learning what they wanted to learn.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you made any changes based to the content based on what you thought the students
We certainly did.
rather than what they need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were looking, as I said, when we were designing our assessments and we were designing the lab protocol and the case studies, we actually were quite mindful of what students had, what we thought they should learn, if that makes sense.
I was just more interested in whether, say I might want to learn something,
Yeah.
easy and fun, but there's a difference between wanting to learn
Yeah.
something and needing to learn something.
So what we did for that is that we had some basic threshold ideas that we wanted them to get out of the labs, but then there was separate pages. Should you need more information, this is where you go and have a look. So there were sub-pages for within that program. Lisa.
then what data do you have about the engagement with the subpages? Because from an engagement perspective, we would actually say that the students go beyond the threshold concepts
Yeah.
and engage with additional information. That would be a proxy for engagement.
Sure.
So do you actually track that data?
We do. We are actually currently doing a longitudinal study on the first year being 2018, and we are tracking the students and how many clicks they're doing and how much time they're spending on each of the page, how long does it take for them to do the pre-lab and so on. Yeah. So hopefully in the next session I can tell you more about it. Right. Well, thank you for your attention. Thank you.